Well, hey, you are watching the video version of the Marketing Should Be Fun podcast. It's so good to have you here. You can find this show on any of your favorite podcast platforms. There's the art, looks like that. You got Apple Podcasts, you got Spotify, you got all the rest. Anywhere you want to find it, you can check it out. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation. Well, welcome back to the Marketing Should Be Fun podcast. My name's Austin Savage, and I'm the founder of Savage Content Collective. And today I am not here with Kelsey or Mitch, but I'm actually joined by my mom today, and I'm really excited. So, Mom, welcome to the Marketing Should Be Fun podcast.
Well, thank you. It's so fun to join you here.
It is fun, and it's going to be a really fun conversation. But not only are you a client of Savage Content Collective, and so we have kind of that whole relationship, but you also have the family connection. And the reason that I'm having you on the podcast today is because you have been content marketing in general. You have done content marketing for 15 to 20 years at this point, which is kind of crazy. Like, do you know how, like, when you started blogging
You
consistently?
know what? Honestly, I've been content marketing really, if you want to talk about old school, I've been content
Yeah.
marketing since 1995, which is almost
Wow.
30 years.
That's so
It's,
crazy. That, yeah, is
I mean,
longer
it's
than
like
I've been
20.
alive. So by a
Yeah, and
year.
it's because I started I started and as a newspaper columnist.
Yeah,
And and so we were providing content every single week
totally.
for the organization that I was leading. And we didn't call it content marketing back then,
Yeah,
but it was, having a presence, meeting the needs of people, talking about the things that are important to them,
yeah,
having, creating content that helps people go, me too. Oh my
yeah,
gosh, I'm not alone. And so yeah, we started that then. And in the early years of the organization that I led for 24 years, Hearts at Home, we also had our own magazine, which was a
yeah,
form of content marketing.
yeah,
And when we stopped producing the magazine, in essence, we just moved the content online
right,
to a blog, a website, eventually social media, all of that. And then, of course, now that organization shut its doors in 2017. And then I have been really intently content marketing since
yeah,
then, under, just really for our ministry
right.
and our audience that we now encourage.
I love it. Okay, normally we do a this or that up front, but we just dove in. We're skipping the this or that, and we are just going to dive right into the interview because there's too much stuff to get through. Anyways, this is good. It's great. It's great. Okay, you gave so much good stuff that I want to uh, nitpick
Peace
a little
out
bit, or
there.
yeah,
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
to get it there. But first, let's just give people a little bit of context, specifically today. Give people a little like overview of what your ministry does and what you do.
Yeah. So Mark and I, together, my husband and I, minister to marriages, and that is really our primary audience. I
Mm-hmm.
still have a leftover audience that I still love and minister to in the mom world because I did
Yeah.
that for 24 years. So, but our main focus is marriage, and we do that in a variety of ways. We go to churches and do marriage conferences. We do online courses. We do marriage coaching in person and through Zoom. And
Yeah.
then we offer a really unique marriage intensive for couples who want to create something new in their marriage. It's either stale and they want to freshen it up, or it's broken and hurting, and
Yeah.
they want to find what we call a 2.0 relationship.
I love it. You can go to markandjill.org to find all of those details, and there's a lot of good
That's
stuff. I love all the things that you guys are doing. Great. So that gives people a little bit of a foundation. So I want to go back to some of what you said. Specifically, you said the phrase, you created content even 30 years ago that made people just say, me too. Um, and
Yeah.
dig into a little bit for us, like why does that matter? Like, what is the value of creating the type of content that people connect with? How have you seen that play out in your like the organizations that you've led in the past and in your brand today?
Right. Well, I think that number one, the human experience is that we want to know that we're not alone.
Hmm.
And so we want to know that because it often feels like we're very much alone. And
Yeah.
so we want to know that we're not alone. We want to know that our life is normal. That's why I often, even when I'm speaking or, we have a lot of fun with the place that we live, which is Normal, Illinois.
Totally.
And I say that that my secondary brand or what I think of in the back of my life is helping people navigate the normal stuff of life, which they may
Right.
not feel is normal, but we want them to know whatever it is they're dealing with, a prodigal child, a broken marriage,
Hmm.
all kinds of deep stuff. I know it doesn't feel normal to you, but there's a lot of other people that have dealt with that. And
Right.
unfortunately, we have as well many things, many things. Um,
Yeah.
we like to say, I used to say that my number one prayer was, Lord, I can probably identify with like 98% of the women out there because of all the variety of things that I have dealt with. Could we just not do the last 2%? Because
Totally. Yeah.
um,
That
but
makes sense.
anyway, yeah. So that's I think that what we want to do is we want to connect with people's hearts. We want them to know that they're not alone. And then ultimately, when we do have resources that will help them, then, like in the case of Hearts at Home, we had these big conferences that moms would
Yeah.
come to. In the case of what we do now, we have our intensives, we have our courses, we have our speaking. And so our hope is that we're connecting. And then when they do need something, they think of us, they turn
Right.
to us because they have relationship with
Hmm.
us. And that's really what my heart has been all
Yeah.
along.
Have you seen that happen?
Oh my goodness. Over and over and over again. I
Yeah.
remember seeing it happen at Hearts at Home. Um, women would talk about how they read um, the newspaper column for years,
Hmm.
and or they would talk about how they would get the magazine and they looked forward to it every month because they knew
Yeah.
it was like they were seen, they really
Hmm.
were understood. But I will tell you a recent one. Is We were just speaking at a church in Columbus, Ohio, and they brought us in to speak at their Sunday morning services. And there was a woman that she just gets my email newsletter,
Yeah.
um, and has tapped into a whole bunch of my resources, online blog posts, podcast episodes. I think she said she had bought one of the courses.
Yeah.
And so she didn't go to that church, but
Mm.
when she saw that we were gonna be there, she jumped at the in fact, the funny thing is I send out the e-newsletter every Saturday morning. She didn't read it Saturday morning, she read it Sunday morning and went, "What? Like, what? They are here.
Yeah.
They're in Columbus. I have to go to this church." So she actually
Hilarious.
showed up at the 11 o'clock service and kind of shared her story. And she had a very broken marriage. And
Hmm.
she said, "You have been my lifeline for the last
Yeah.
5 years."
Wow. That's really cool.
So that's the impact, I think,
Hmm.
of that for
Yeah.
sure.
I think that's like a great just example of how, obviously the methods of how we do content marketing have changed, right? Like you've been blogging and, writing for a really long time, and, you've had to move into podcasting and doing some different things. But really, like, the reason that we create that content still remains the same is because, when people can connect with you on that human level, on that kind of deep, just have that personal connection, it builds that trust for them to be willing to, be like, oh, you have this event in my area. Like, no question am I going to go. Or, yes, you are
Right.
coming out with this new course. Like, absolutely, I'm going to take that step because you have, built that trust over time. So it's really cool because I feel like you are a great example of what we're trying to move a lot of our clients towards, and just kind of encourage people in general to leverage is there's a great value also in just doing this for a really long time. That's why we tell people that this is the long game, because for people, like, I'm sure that there are people from 20 to 30 years ago who are still tapped into your resources and still
Mhm.
making recommendations for you, that just have a deep kind of trust and respect for all of the value that you have brought them consistently, for that long of a time period.
Yes. Yes,
Yeah.
and I will say, Austin, I probably get about 1 email a week on
Hmm.
average, or maybe even an Instagram message here and there, or a Facebook message of somebody that will say, "I've been following you since, whenever." Because, and I'll
Yeah.
tell you, the women remember it because they can remember based upon when their children were born.
Oh,
So they'll
that's true.
say, "I've been following you since 1997 when my last child was born and I came to a
Yeah.
Hearts at Home conference," or whatever. It's so funny, but uh I so I do. I hear that. And so then, what we'll sometimes even get is um like you were just talking about, the recommendation. So they
Hmm.
trust me, and then
Right.
they have either in their life something happens, particularly in the vicinity of marriage, because that's so much
Mhm.
what we're doing now, or they know a friend that their marriage
Yeah.
is crumbling, or they just found out about infidelity, or their own child is struggling. And so then they reach out and go, "What do you have for this situation?"
Yeah.
So you're right. They are, I mean, I've built their trust, and then
Mhm.
they're the ones that are thinking, "Oh, you have a situation, you need to check out these
Right.
resources over at jillsavage.org."
Yeah, totally. That's huge. I mean, it trickles down beyond them, right? It's that even, like, human to human connection of, like, making recommendations on your behalf, right? Like, that's not work that you're having to do. Like, because you've built
Yes.
this trust with people, they are spreading the word about your brand on your behalf. And it's just like this,
Yes.
a continuous kind of effect. That's huge. It's huge for any brand. In the obviously
Mhm.
in the ministry space, that is impactful, but even in the corporate space, right? Like, that is so valuable for people to receive value from you and then to talk about your product, your offering
Yes.
on your behalf over and over again,
Yeah.
because they trust you.
And I think what's key there, Austin, is delivering that value,
Hmm.
not marketing to them all the time.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
delivering value, ways that serve them in their life, and then
Hmm.
when they are ready, especially if you're in the corporate world and not in the ministry world, but then when they are ready for a certain product, then and that's the product you sell, you're going to be top of their mind to
Right.
consider that.
Right on brand, mom. Great job. I love it. It's so true. I love it. Okay, I got a lot of other questions. So I want to hear too. Have you seen, you've been doing this for a long time, right? Like, and some of your methods have changed, right?
Mhm.
You talked about, started with kind of newspaper magazine columns, that kind of led to blogging naturally. Then you incorporated
Mhm.
email and social, and then most recently a podcast. Have you noticed, or what ways have you noticed the way that people connect with content? How have those changed, like, over the last, I mean, that's a long time, but over the last 20 or so years?
Well, I think it's easier for them with social media by all means.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just easier to have a two-way conversation.
Mm-hmm.
In the early years, our main content was, through the magazine or the newspaper. Well, somebody's going to read the newspaper and they're not going to be able
Right.
to immediately make a comment or ask a
Mm-hmm.
question or anything like that. And so I think that the we're in a time of life where it's easier to actually have a two-way conversation,
Yeah.
and that's why it's super important for me. You guys help me with my content out there, but I love that I get to interact with
Right.
people. I manage all my own messages, I manage my comments, and I love being able to do that, because then it also helps me to have a pulse on
Mm-hmm.
the heart of uh, my followers, and to know what are the things that are weighing heavy on them.
Yeah, that is very true. I think that the value of this is back really to what we just were talking about. When you think about the value of that conversation, I mean, it just is an even more like it's an even better opportunity for that human to human connection, I think, than I think in
Yes.
some of those older delivery systems it really was, hey, here's this piece of content, which is still very valuable, and people can still reach out, just takes more time. But I mean, that's huge for there to be this real time kind of back and forth between, you and your audience. Do you find yourself leveraging that often? Do you think, like, in your brand, do you think that's like a big part of the, like, is that a big part of just the connection aspect of your brand? Or do you feel like that's also a big part of like helping people take next steps as well?
Yes, and yes.
Hmm.
I think it's both. I think it's important from the connection aspect, but I also think it is important for helping people take next steps, helping them to even connect to the resources that they need.
Yeah,
And honestly, sometimes that's my resources, and sometimes it's someone else's. Like,
absolutely.
we have, that's I would just want them to be resourced. If we have it,
Hmm.
great. If not, then I want them to know, hey, you're probably going to find what you need over here. So
Yeah,
sometimes it's helping them just connect the dots to the right things for their situation and their circumstances.
absolutely. Yeah, that's great. So you launched a podcast 2.5 years ago, I believe, called the
Yep.
No More Perfect podcast. And I remember when you launched it before this company existed. So I remember that, like, we were just talking, back and forth about whether you should, and I was kind of encouraging you to move in that direction, but there were like some hesitations that you kind of felt about launching a podcast before you did. Walk us through some of that kind of like internal battle for you about whether or not to launch a podcast, and then walk us through like what it has been like since you've made that decision to do so.
So, I think that I'm not a podcast listener.
Totally.
And so, it's really hard. Now, I kind of caveat that. There are times I listen to podcasts, but
Yeah,
I'm not a regular podcast listener,
right.
okay? I don't regularly consume podcasts. I don't regularly consume podcasts. But, so that was one thing, is when you don't already value something for yourself, it's hard
Yeah,
to imagine that other people do value it. And
yeah,
so that was one piece for me. Uh, the second, I mean, you were on me about starting a podcast. Your sister was on me about starting a podcast. Your other
yeah,
sister was on me. And I think your brother Evan was also on me on
yeah.
occasion. He was like, all of you guys were saying, Mom, you need to do a podcast. You need to. So, and I'm thinking, I mean, y'all are younger generation, next
Hmm.
generation. So I'm, thinking, okay, yeah, definitely. I probably need to consider this. But I would say that the second thing that was really big for me was just not having the time to do it.
Yeah,
It really was. Like, that was I was just like, "I'm already stretched thin. I don't know
Mhm.
that I can do that." And so that I was really hesitant because I didn't feel that I could keep up with it.
Right.
And so that really held me back. I just didn't feel like I had the bandwidth to be able to do
Mhm.
it. So, but this is where the pandemic was helpful
Yeah.
because when the pandemic happened, we lost 35 speaking engagements.
Wow.
So suddenly the world shut down, our income shut down,
Yeah.
everything shut down. And
Mhm.
all of a sudden, I had time.
Yeah.
I had time. And so I was like, you know, um, maybe this is the right time to do it. And we did a quick pivot and began to offer online seminars. And it was amazing. They replaced our income
Mhm.
um, by the time we did several of them in 2020. And so then at the same time, it was like, all right, well, what if we use this time? And I started the podcast. So that was really my biggest thing was bandwidth. And then suddenly I had bandwidth to do it. So,
Yeah.
got it going. For me, having help with it was really huge. And initially,
Yeah.
like you said, Savage Content didn't exist, but your sister helped me. She
Yeah.
was really good with that kind of stuff. So she helped. I would just record the episodes and then she would edit them and get them ready for the world out there. So having help really did make a difference for me. And then when she stopped doing it, you were starting up, and it
Right.
just made sense for you to be able to really help us take it to the next level, which
Mhm.
I've really, really appreciated. And now, I mean, honestly, we're back to pre pandemic. Um, the weight and the workload is pre-pandemic now because we're back to speaking, we're now
Yeah.
coaching and doing all of that, but I feel like I now have the systems in place and the
Yeah.
processes in place that I don't feel the weight of it.
Hmm.
It's pretty much starting to happen naturally.
Yeah. So I just checked, and you're at hopefully you're okay with me sharing this, but just
Yeah.
now you're at 215,000 downloads on your podcast, which is awesome. And I feel like you really have that's quickly become kind of a foundational sort of channel for you, I think.
Mhm.
Did that has that surprised you?
Yeah. Yeah, it has. It's been
Hmm.
really interesting to see. Although for me, I'll tell you what I think of it as is, for 24 years I did mom conferences,
Yeah.
and those conferences would have keynote sessions, they'd have workshops, the moms would be so equipped.
Yeah.
I honestly think of my podcast is it's an online conference. It
Totally.
it really is.
Hmm.
And so, when I just recorded one just yesterday on anxiety. And I'm like, it was such a good conversation. I'm like, I can't wait for this to release because I know
Yeah.
it was like going to a workshop on anxiety.
Hmm.
And so I really, really love that. And
Yeah.
I feel like it is important. You challenge, I've gone the route with my podcast of primarily doing interviews.
Yeah.
I mean, when you're in ministry for 30 years, you have a lot of connections. So I've leveraged those connections.
Totally.
But you challenged me this year and we took you up on the challenge
Totally. I love it.
that you did. You were like, you guys, I think people really like it when you and dad tackle topics.
Yeah.
And so we are adjusting. We're still doing, three quarters of them are interviews, but used to we just sprinkled occasional ones in there. Now
Right.
it's a quarter of our episodes are us talking about a certain subject,
Hmm.
sharing the things that we teach to our coaching clients,
Yeah.
that kind of stuff.
What do you feel like now? I love that you highlighted that systems have really helped you kind of sustain the podcast even um, as things have gotten busy again. In our last episode, Mitch and I talked about just some questions around launching a podcast, and that was one of the big things we talked about. Is just you really want to make sure that you are launching with a rhythm that you can sustain and have a system to, keep it moving. Um, but what do you feel like have been the biggest challenges with maintaining or kind of launching the podcast? Or what do you feel like the biggest challenges are like today with it?
Um, that's a really good question. Um, I think, coming up with the content
Mhm.
is one piece of it, depending on how often you're releasing. We release every week.
Yeah.
So that's 52 pieces of content in a year. And so it's like, what topics are we going to cover? How do we not be too repetitive?
Mhm.
How do we build off what we've already done? So I think that is a challenge. Um, but I honestly, I don't find now that we have the rhythm, it did take a while to figure out the rhythm.
Mhm.
Um, and that was an initial challenge
Yeah.
was I felt like there were times where I was like, I mean, now I work so far in advance that I'm usually, you know, I sometimes have 3, 4, 5, 10 in the hopper
Right.
that, but way back in the beginning, it was like, "Oh, I gotta get another one done." So I didn't
Right.
really have it's like,
Yeah.
"Oh, shoot." And so I didn't really have those rhythms built in and, I wasn't ahead of the game, but now I feel like that was, part of when you start something new, you gotta
Mhm.
figure out how to make it work.
Yeah.
So, I think that was probably one of my biggest challenges, at least initially.
Yeah. Something that I just remembered too is I remember when we first started working with you on your show. That was one of the first times that we like set a specific like day of the week that your show needed to release too. Like I remember
Yes.
before it would, it was like the goal was Tuesday or whatever, but just with like figuring out the systems, there would be time that it was like, oh, it's Tuesday or might be Thursday. Sometimes it might be, Wednesday or Friday or, whatever. And that's totally
Mhm.
fine, for uh for any content platform, right? You got to do what you can and be good with that. But once we started working together, we're like, no, Tuesday's going to be our release date and we're going to work towards always releasing it then. And I think that's really when we started to see the momentum kind of like lock in for your show um too. Like that was a really big game changer for how
Yeah,
quickly we started to see things take off. Would you agree with that?
I would. I really would. I think and I actually see that in the podcast. I see it in my email list.
Mm,
People like to know when they can depend on you.
yeah,
And, like when I started sending out a regular email to my list, I started once a month
yeah,
because that's all I thought I could sustain.
right,
And so I just committed that the first Saturday of every month, my list was going to hear from me. And then eventually I moved it to every other Saturday. And then eventually I moved it to every Saturday. I mean, I'm to the point now, if I am not going to send one out on a Saturday, I let people know because
yeah,
if not, it's going to be like, are you okay? Where are you? They're
hmm,
depending on, and then they're like, I really missed it.
yeah,
And so I think the same thing has happened with the podcast. People, that are followers, they do look forward to their Tuesday encouragement and
yeah,
wondering what that's going to be and then tuning into it. So I do think regular content makes a big difference, but you have to start with what you can sustain.
absolutely,
And so start small. That's fine. Just get
yeah,
started.
yeah. That is so good. Just everybody re-listen to that just little section right there. That was so good. Um, what this is kind of a big question, but what advice just generally that you maybe it's what you have shared, maybe it's something different, but for people who are listening who want to build a community or engage an audience, just generally, maybe they're early on in the journey or just kind of trying to freshen up their strategy. What advice do you have from your experience?
Well, I would say first, your voice is needed
Hmm.
because I think a lot of times we talk ourselves out of it or
Yeah.
we hold back because we think, um, hey, there's already people out there talking about this stuff, but they're not talking about it the way that you talk about it.
Yeah.
They're not talking about it from your experience. They're
Hmm.
not talking about it from your wisdom or even the angle of your wisdom because it's hard earned wisdom.
Right.
Whatever it is you're passionate about it for a reason.
Hmm.
And so I think that's probably one of the first things because I think we all deal with imposter syndrome
Yeah.
to some degree, and it holds us back more than what we realize.
Hmm.
And then that really leads into the second, and that would be kind of what we said just earlier. Just start.
Yeah.
Just start. Start by um, determining what is a sustainable pace for you
Hmm.
and just get started and commit to keeping that going at that sustainable pace and then grow off of that.
Yeah.
And so we got to start small. I mean, when I first started my podcast, I remember I don't even I mean, I did like a trailer and I
Yeah.
had like what, 5 people that probably subscribed to the trailer. I mean, it
There
was
was
like
more than that,
it
but
was
yes, it is small.
small.
Yeah.
And
Totally.
those first episodes, they would just have, under 100 people listen to them.
Right.
Um, and now, we have thousands,
Hmm.
but that would have never happened unless we started.
Right.
And so we just have to be willing to get started and then recognize it's a slow snowball.
Yeah.
And so you gotta get started, get going, and trust that you'll learn how to do it better and better all the time. You'll
Yeah.
learn what your audience needs, but don't let the imposter syndrome hold you back, and um, and don't keep putting it off. Just get
Yeah.
going.
That's huge. I mean, we have seen a lot of those same struggles for people too. Like you highlighted too, we have seen where people might have the bravery to start, but then get frustrated by how slow the start is and,
Hmm.
quit too early. Where, just like
Yeah,
you were saying, there really is this like, it's the long game is what we often say is where, you have to kind of uh, pay your dues in a sense where you are just committing to be that steady presence for people and let it kind of build up from there. But it takes patience, it takes consistency, and it really does take that kind of long-term view of like, I know that this is what I want to do, and I'm not going to let any discouragement of what this looks like or what I was expecting kind of keep me from uh you know keeping on this journey moving
yeah,
forward. Yeah.
yep, exactly.
So I'm curious. I know we didn't highlight this in your intro, but you have written 14 books, I believe. Is it? No, it's like 15, isn't it?
I think
A
it's
lot.
15 or 16. I don't know. I haven't counted lately, but yeah, we added 2 more last year, so I think it probably is 16.
Wow. So that's crazy, like just on its own. But I am curious for you. I don't want to use the word product in the wrong way here because I know that you are a ministry and kind of have, a different goal in mind. But do you view your books as a part of your content marketing strategy, like kind of just a way
Mm.
to provide content to people in the hopes that they'll take a deeper step with you? Or do you really view your books as a um, product that your content marketing strategy is leading people towards? Like, how do you kind of uh, categorize that in your mind?
Um, I think it's both.
I knew you were
I
going to
think
say
it's
that.
both, but I think that the first one,
Hmm.
where they connect with the content to lead them to connect with me, has always probably been one of my biggest desires.
Yeah.
And that's why at the back of every one of my books, it says, I have a page that says, hey, I'm so glad that you picked up this book.
Hmm.
If you'd like to stay connected, you can find me on Instagram here. You can find me on Facebook here,
Yeah.
TikTok, wherever it is that we are. And so I view it as they find the book in the bookstore or they find it somewhere, a friend recommends it, and then my hope is that they'll actually connect with me. But I do use our content to also drive people to our books,
Right.
because I want them to know
Yeah.
about the books, and if they want to dive deeper into a subject, if
Hmm.
they want to understand something at a level that's deeper than um, what I can do in a 40-minute podcast,
Yeah.
then, you know, the books are a great way to also encourage people and a great direction to point them in.
I love it. That was a great answer. Big question. So for you personally, how have the changes, and I don't want to say like changes in culture, but the ways that you have had to change to show up for your audience, things like launching a podcast when you don't, maybe listen to podcasts, or, having to incorporate, maybe different rhythms of showing up for your audience. How have those things forced you to grow as a like content creator or as a leader over the years?
Yeah, I mean, they really have kind of forced me to embrace technology
Hmm.
when sometimes I want to throw it out the window. Um,
That's fair.
let's be really honest. And, learn things that I wouldn't have learned before.
Yeah.
Honestly, they've taken me into some uncomfortable places.
Hmm.
Doing some things for like reels on Instagram
Yeah.
or things like that are like, okay, this is kind of uncomfortable. And I want to be totally authentic. And that's super important to me that I
Right.
am like authentic, but it has stretched me.
Mhm.
It's stretched me in a good way, I feel like, in
Right.
a good way that, and honestly, even from a technology perspective, I think that the growth that it has done has also helped me in my personal life. Like,
Hmm.
because I'm not afraid of technology because I'm
Mhm.
kind of started learning to use it. Um, Now that my grandkids are old enough to be some of my grandkids, yours aren't old enough yet, but
Totally.
your sister's kids are entering their teen years. So
Mhm.
I feel like it's also made me more connected
Yeah.
to the next generation. So it's definitely stretched me and caused me to learn things. Um, what I will say though, Austin, is I have also been challenged to figure out some of the things I don't want to learn.
Mhm.
And that's where I know that I have to outsource it or
Yeah.
not do it.
Right.
Because there's just a limit sometimes, and
Mhm.
we're producing a lot of content. I mean,
Yeah.
we're in a lot of social media um channels, and we're doing the podcast, and we're doing courses and
Mhm.
all of that. So it's a lot, and I do get to a place where somebody will want to teach me how to do something, and I'm just like, nope, I cannot. I don't want to learn how to do that.
Yeah.
And that's okay. Like, I have to
Yeah.
give myself permission to be okay with that.
Hmm.
So I feel like that has been even a personal growth
Yeah.
for me of knowing what's good and appropriate to learn and jumping in with 2 feet because I do need to understand it. And also, what do I need to not spend my time on
Right.
and I need to give to someone else.
Yeah. That's huge. All right, I have one
Mhm.
last question for you.
Okay.
Um and this is maybe another big one, but I want to talk real quick about goal setting around content marketing as well. As we're talking to people who, either are launching something new or have been doing something for a while, I think that there are kind of two ends of the spectrum where like there are people who are really, really focused on wanting to like reach specific goals with content marketing. And it can be hard then for them to be comfortable with the human aspect of how trust takes time and, all of those
Yeah.
things. And then on the other side, I think that there are people who are, just very, very comfortable with like, I'm just creating this content, whatever happens, happens. And then there's plenty of people who fall in the middle and, whatever. But for you, what does goal setting look like for your content marketing initiatives? Like, is that something that's important to you? Do you feel like that is not really something that you look at closely, or what does that kind of, I
That's
don't
a
know.
good question. So, I do keep a spreadsheet on my computer
Mm-hmm.
that I check, like, my social media numbers and my email marketing numbers.
Hmm.
I would say every 6 to 12 months. I don't do it
Okay.
real often.
Yeah.
My goal is growth.
Hmm.
I will say that my goal, I have not, I don't usually set solid numbers,
Yeah.
but I want to see that I'm growing.
Yeah.
I want to see that it's making a difference. And a lot of times I'll feel like I'm not, and then I'll go out and plug those numbers in and go, oh
Right.
my gosh.
Yeah.
Like we added 1,000 followers on Instagram. I didn't know that. Or even way
Right.
back when I first started it, it would be like, oh my gosh, we added 100 followers on
Yep.
Instagram over the last 6 months. I didn't even think we'd added anybody.
Right.
So, when you're seeing it every single day, you're often not noticing that. So I do think it's valuable. But what you're talking about too is having realistic expectations.
Yeah.
And, this is something we teach in our marriage coaching,
Right.
because when you have unrealistic expectations,
Mm-hmm.
um, and then you have reality. So unrealistic expectations is kind of like, you've got this high number in your head, but reality is at a different place. The space in between is discontentment.
Yeah.
And so what I want to do is I want to have realistic expectations
Hmm.
so that I'm not discontent with the reality. Or if I realize that I'm not growing somewhere,
Right.
then that also helps me to go, oh, what do we need to do differently?
Hmm.
What do we need to do? Do I need to get out of this space? Well, you know what? We chose that with Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I
Right.
I had a Twitter channel for a while and I was out, on Twitter, but it just wasn't gaining traction.
Right.
And finally, we just said, you know what? I don't feel like my people are really on Twitter.
Yeah.
It's just not the best place for me to invest my time.
And that was hard too, because I mean, you had like 4 or 5,000 people like over there, didn't you? Like, wasn't that like
Yeah,
a,
I had a decent amount. I don't know if I had quite that many,
yeah.
but they weren't engaged.
Right.
That wasn't where I naturally was spending my time.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, sometimes
Yeah.
you also got to let go of that. But yeah, I would say in general, you've got to have realistic expectations, and that whole long haul thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's a lot of people out there that they're like, I'll teach you how to get this in this amount of time. And,
Yeah.
you know, the reality is, I'm sorry, even if you do shortcut, it doesn't always mean that you've just built a relationship with those people.
Right.
So I don't think in what we do and with our content marketing, anything's a quick fix.
Mm-hmm.
I think it has to be a long-term commitment to serve your audience.
Yeah.
And that's what we do with Jam Savage Ministries, and everything that we do to encourage people in the relationships that mean the most to them. We want to serve our audience well.
Yeah. This was so fun to have you on the podcast, Mom. Thank you so much for taking the time. I shared this up front, but you people who are listening, you can learn more about what my mom and dad are doing at markandjill.org. There are all sorts of resources there, and you can check out, all of the things that we've been mentioning, their blog, their podcast, their emails, their social, all of those things. But yes, thank you so much for being on today, Mom. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm glad that it worked out.
Yes. And to our listeners, we will see you right back here on the next episode of Marketing Should Be Fun.